So we're done with manual, and we're now going to move into the speech domain. So in this work, we're asking, is there a speech motor deficit in DLD? And we've been doing this a long time. I'm giving you a sample of some of the studies that we've been doing. So I'm first going to talk about a place where kids with DLD have no trouble at all. It's in producing what we call practiced and crystallized words and phrases that function as a unit. And I'm going to tell you what I mean by this. The way I want to talk about this at first is that we got this idea thinking about why are some aspects okay by looking at the birdsong literature. And again, I love the idea. I have a couple of examples where I went very outside my field to get insights about things that were important within the field. So we found this paper by Veit and colleagues where they wrote the flexible control of sequential behavior is a fundamental aspect of speech, enabling endless reordering of a limited set of learned vocal elements, syllables, or words. And this is from actually how birdsongs organize. In the birdsong literature, they make a distinction between crystallized units, practiced syllables, words and phrases, maybe what I don't know birdsong stuff very well, but what adult birds crystallize on, and ever reorganized elements that are dependent sequences. So this distinction, we think, characterizes the aspects of speech motor skill that are spared compared with those that are affected in DLD. So in this study with Meredith Saletta, was a student in the lab as well, but I'm going to just show you the paradigm because it was kind of fun. In speech motor work, usually people just imitate bye Bobby a puppy, bye Bobby a puppy, bye Bobby a puppy, and we're like, we want to make this a little more language-like, but we also need the multiple repetitions because we study variability. So what we did is in one part of the task, we had kids just do that imitation. Our sentence was mom pats the puppy because it's a better form sentence. So we had them say mom pats the puppy, mom pats the puppy, mom pats the puppy. They came back a few days later, did the same thing, a few days later, 3 times. And that was one condition. In another condition, we wanted them to have to retrieve more. So we used what's often called a priming kind of paradigm, where they heard the same grammatical structure, like monkey pushes the cow. We had fun creating these, actually. And then they had to say mom pats the puppy, or they heard mom pats the puppy, and they had to say mouse washes the bird. So we still got a bunch of productions of mom pats the puppy, but they were interspersed with these other forms. And here are our STIs. I want to remind you these are all accurate. This is for the imitation condition, the really stable STI of 18. This is for an accurately produced form in the primed condition, in the condition where they had to reorganize. The group data showed this. The kids with DLD did not differ, especially by session 3 in the imitation. Everybody's more variable in the priming, but the kids with DLD were especially variable in the priming. So again, little summary. Kids with DLD show no speech deficits following repetition practice, which is what we're now calling crystallization, but they do show speech motor deficits when they're required to reorganize elements of a phrase in a highly structured syntactic priming task. So now what is then impaired in DLD? And there are 2 areas I'm going to talk about today that we're quite focused on. One is going from the music prosody kind of a task to a language prosody kind of task. So we did a whole bunch of experiments on this topic, and I just want to share kind of what they look like. So in these experiments, for example, we introduced kids to these novel little toys like this is a pup. It's Sam's pup. So they're supposed to say Sam's pup. And in another condition, it was a different toy is Sam's pup. So we have a strong weak and a weak strong sequence. And those of you who study child language, weak strong sequences are really hard. Kids say waff for giraffe, but they don't say bay for baby. So that is a very vulnerable syllable. And what we learned, and again, I'm just giving you a little example, we looked at 2 things in this kind of work. We look at the structure of these sequences, and we look at the variability of these sequences. And this is a typical child producing that hard, weak, strong sequence. And I hope you can see this child is really good at implementing. This is a short, small movement and a large, longer movement. They seem to really be able to do that. The child with SLI or DLD, they are getting what we call the category distinction. This is weaker than this, right? But they're not as good at it. They are really having difficulty with that rhythmic sequence, and they are also more variable, 20 versus 14. And I'm just showing you examples, but believe me, in many studies, this one holds up. They are more variable, and they are less organized in their implementation of this sequence. Children with DLD, actually, we didn't expect this either. So many unexpected things have happened. They did not produce similar prosodic distinctions to their typical peers, but they were poor at implementing these rhythmic sequences or alternations. So we are now making the case based on a growing body of work, and we're still studying this area. We're now studying kids with cochlear implants, which is really exciting for some fun reasons. That prosodic grouping deficits are domain general and affect the production of hierarchically organized language and music sequences. I'm going to move to one more set of data to talk about. And for this, we chase methodologies that address questions. So I'm sorry you're going to have to learn one more methodology here. In this work, we were really interested in syllable sequencing and some of the kinds of errors we were seeing in the kids. We're interested in learning. We hope to eventually really bring this back to the clinic. So kids produced, again, 3 sessions of forms. And in this first study, they are meaningless non-words. They're looking at varying pictures that have no meaning. We're going to move to meaning in a little while. So they're hard stimuli, but they don't have a big memory load. They're only 2 syllables long, but they're forms like fush pum, puv gub, muff pum. They're phonologically challenging. We use 2 different methods: error-based accuracy, which I think you're familiar with. How many mistakes do kids make? And then we turn to what is called network science to address some of the issues we saw. I just want to start with what these productions actually are like for kids. So kids are just imitating these words. So a typical child is pretty good at it. They have a few errors: push pum, puv gub, puv gum. They have some errors, and these are close, and they're probably like interfering with each other, these forms. You can tell what they're trying to say. They don't have that many errors. The children with DLD, and I always want to clarify, I am not cherry picking the worst child here, they have a terrible time with this task. And we were kind of mystified by why it was so hard. Hajja, gubga, ubgut, aga, all for the word puv gub. They are all over the place. And we have all of these tools in speech language pathology of how do you analyze these phonologically? Is it articulation? Nothing applied to these errors that these kids were making. First finding is kids over time don't really learn. This is just percent consonants correct. So this is our accuracy measure. Kids with DLD are less accurate, and they pretty much stay the same over time. So we're like, how can we begin to think about these errors? And this was another serendipity, even better, way better than the birdsong one, because I was in a coffee shop at Purdue one day talking to a psychologist named Rich Schweikert, who you saw maybe was on this paper, and he was studying dreams and how people, like networks of people who interact in your dreams. So when you dream, do the people know each other? How do they interact? So that's like social networks. And we're like, we need to apply social networks to syllable friends. So what we did is we called each syllable like a node or a person in the social network. So here, pus is 1, pun is 1. So the kids said pun pum twice. So the nodes are pun and pum. This is the edge or the connector, and a thicker connector means it occurred more frequently. So this kid used the same final syllable all the time, but a different initial syllable every single time. So we could use this little network idea, pupum, puspum, to talk about how they were sequencing. In this example, we're looking at learning over time again, and remember they were the same for accuracy over time. You can see this is just all the kids glommed together, and the kids with DLD show more networks, but they improve compared to the TD kids, and the TD kids also improve. So to show you what happened, nodes are the syllables. There's learning from session 1 to 2, unlike accuracy. The bad news is they're locking onto the wrong form, that means, right? But the good news is they're learning. So their nodes go down. They're using fewer different syllables. Their edges go down. They're using fewer different edges, and their edge weights go up. They're using the same form more than they were before. Now, we did the same over 2 years. We had longitudinal data here, and we got the same story. Kids with DLD, they improve over years. So this is 4 and 5, 6 and 7, 7 and 8-year-olds at the end. We think this is a really neat marker of DLD because lots of things change developmentally. This seems to be something that they're still having problems with. And right now we're working on a clinical measure to do this in a more useful way. So the organization of phonological sequences in novel word form learning is clearly impaired in DLD. Fits with our deficit that children have trouble with sequential dependencies, and we think this really relates also to their problems with grammatical aspects of language. Though they have difficulty initially learning new word forms, once they have stable representations of these forms, I'm going to be pretty technical here, their word form lexicon appears to be structured like that of typical children. So why that's important is it's not like they do this forever. If you listen to a person with DLD talk, they use words accurately. So there's something funny going on here. So what we turn to then, and a lot of this work was led by and in an interaction with Dr. Gladfelter, is could semantic cues facilitate word form learning via crystallization? These were all non-words, right? So can the learning of sequences be facilitated when a meaningful referent is added? Or more complex semantic cues? Do semantic cues help the child crystallize? Semantics or conceptual components are often viewed as an area of strength in DLD. Can we capitalize on this in intervention? So in one study with Sarah Benham, we did the same thing, but now we layer on half of the words have a very simple meaning. This is a fushpum. Look, this is a fushpum. This is a fushpum again and again. We call it a simple referent. And when we added a simple referent, children with DLD stabilized their word forms. Phonetic accuracy didn't improve, but the meaning helped them stabilize these networks. So that was the first result. Now I'm telling you about a brand new paper that we're super excited is just coming out right now. And here we added a more complicated condition where we embedded these into a more complex story. So in this one, remember, we're just saying this is a fushpum, this is a fushpum. Here we're saying this is a puvgub, it likes to play in the park. Puvgubs go to school, lots of different, deeper information. And what we learned here is that accuracy, we thought that should improve these children. It actually reduced their accuracy. It also increased their variability, both typical and not and DLD learners. They became more variable in their word forms, but stability was not affected at all. And notice these are all kind of the same prosodic structure. Fushpum, puvgup, they're all strong, weak. So by sessions 2 and 3, they are not reorganizing that prosodic template, but they are reorganizing their sound patterns. And we think that might even be a good thing about learning, that it's keeping them really flexible. So does a semantic cue facilitate word form crystallization? This is just some of the things we're really thinking about now. We have a bunch of work from just one experimental session of learning saying yes. When you add a simple referent, motor patterns stabilize and networks stabilize. But as semantic complexity increases, word form crystallization may be disrupted, and we think now we're trying to be positive. We were surprised again, as we always are. This may indicate more flexible learning. So to close, the sequential pattern learning deficit is actually quite nuanced. We are making the case that DLD is not actually a disorder of language, speech, or motor skill, but rather it's an impaired ability to detect and use sequential dependencies or patterns across multiple domains. We are making a strong case that children with DLD have domain general deficits in learning sequential dependencies, but no deficits in producing non-sequential units like taps, novel signs, or crystallized forms like well-practiced words, phrases, prosodic sequences, and sentences. So as our hypothesis has grown, crystallized forms are at the heart of it regarding the pattern of spared and affected abilities in children with DLD. Implication for assessment and intervention. First, we think we need to broaden assessment paradigms. Late talkers are impossible to identify who's really going to have a problem down the road. Bilingual learners may show difficulties with language for many reasons, so we think these broader deficits may be diagnostic. We also think they might influence the substance of intervention. And there are two general approaches floating out there. One is very compensatory. There's a guy named Michael Ullman who has something called the procedural deficit hypothesis that's really quite important. He doesn't call it crystallization, but in my current way of thinking, go with crystallization. We actually think emphasizing teaching the sequential dependencies and using other aspects of knowledge such as semantic components to facilitate learning, that's the approach we kind of are going in thinking about. This is the deficit, let's try to teach it from multiple domains rather than just be compensatory. This is science, totally. I've been wrong a lot, probably wrong again. So we contend that language and action are interconnected, but that common cognitive underpinnings are highly specified. This is not just a noisy spectrum, and are especially related to sequential pattern learning among very likely other cognitive processes. I'm not a one process drives it all kind of person. And on that note, thank you. How would you test this with a bilingual child? We actually have a grant we're trying to get funded right now that's addressing that very topic. And we want to start with Spanish-English bilinguals because there's a huge need, and also we need some way to sort of to be able to, in the bilingual learners, have some other index of whether they actually have DLD. And there's actually a good assessment, the BESA, Liz Pena and Lisa Bedore's assessment, that we can have, we can validate our measures. So what we are doing is we're trying to create some more clinically useful measures. We have non-word repetition tasks, and we have Spanish and English talkers. We have a bunch of pilot data now for prosodically varying, like the pup-up kind of task. We have a music task. We have a little novel sign learning task with bimanual signs. And we've also, a line of work I did not share with you, is we have a hand learning pattern task where we can look at different kinds of statistical patterns that we predict are hard for kids with DLD. So for 4-year-olds, that's kind of our set, our hand pattern learning for what we think are hard speech patterns. And what we want to do is get this body of measures. You hit just what I wanted to talk about, so sorry. This body of measures, and use machine learning methodology to look at how they cohere, because I am really bad at motor tasks, but I'm pretty good at language tasks personally. So we know that sometimes things don't cohere for other kinds of reasons, but we think that if this very specific set of tasks coheres, that's an indicator of the sequence learning deficit that we think is important for DLD. Now, late talkers, we've been talking about that, but coming up with the tasks that 2-year-olds are willing to do is a whole new horizon. I started out as a clinician, and I'm pretty basic scientist now. So I think I do think there are some really clear clinical implications. Like I think Leah Sachs, the work she led, that we should not just measure tense and agreement grammatical morphemes. The question is, what are the implications for clinicians and teachers? I think we have put kids, due to our own brains, into these boxes. Kids with autism, kids with DLD, kids with cochlear implants, kids with speech sound disorders, and we've also had a obviously very strong disorder bias. And I think we're much better served, thinking about kids as, right now my ideal kind of outcome of this is, first of all, include more domains when we actually assess any child. So that's one answer. And then the second answer is, I actually do, because of who I am, I do think morphosyntactic and phonological learning is very special. It's actually affected in lots of kinds of learners. That's why we're going down the cochlear implant road right now. Some of the kids who get cochlear implants have long-term problems with morphosyntax and phonology. I think we need to think about how these arrays work with those children, not just throwing them all in, let's just focus on speech perception here or whatever. You see what I mean? So one answer is being much broader and including many more measures for every child we assess. And I know I'm saying that in the face of a climate where we're not spending money on these things, but we can dream. And then the second is pulling out these morphosyntactic phonological deficits and broadening how and where we look for them. So that's a couple. I have to believe that we've had very ineffective interventions, and that I think focusing on the kinds of statistical sequences that are problematic in intervention has potential. It's not very satisfying. It's really basic work that's hopefully opening the door to think about the space in new ways. And I'll look forward to getting other people's ideas. Co-treatment would be a big implication. And, a lot of this emerged. I worked as Allison said at the beginning, in a transdisciplinary early intervention program. And honestly, a lot of these ideas were born in collaborative work with OTs and PTs and developmentalists. So and actually psychologists, and the psychosocial side was fundamental to my intervention. So co-treatment, it's again expensive, but it's the way to go. You are trying to frame writing, speaking. Why are we viewing these as disorders? Why cannot we accept that this is normal variation? And how should we kind of think about this in terms of, why am I so obsessed with treatment and identification? Why is it called developmental disorder? Why are we, as we write about it, very obsessed? And I want to say, like Carla McGregor, we are obsessed with, these people are understudied, undertreated, unlike autism, frankly. So why do we even care? And I think we care because it's what our society values, and it's what the success of these individuals depends on. Like, if you listen to this guy, it is like a huge relief for parents and for individuals who have DLD to have it identified, to understand what the nature of the problem is, because it is very much getting in their way in our society. Years ago, Larry Leonard, who was also at Purdue and is somebody we both love a lot, he published a paper on language kind of disorder as a continuum, and he made a point that was really salient to me in that paper, is if you lived in a society where hunting and gathering was what you needed to survive, somebody like me would be very disordered. And so I think it's very reliant on the people who are having the lived experience of the disorder, frankly. They are very in on our approach to this problem, and Carla in particular, and if you look at DLD and me, is really bringing in people living with the lived experience, parents as well as adults as well as children who have DLD. And so I think we're all on very much the same page about, these are smart people who are not making it and they have no idea. Now, this is common with dyslexia too. I mean, I think this is shared with dyslexia, and I would think maybe less so with autism, which is a whole different array of issues. I don't know if that's at all fair. No, it's a conversation starter. Yeah. And I'd love to argue about it, because I think, like the beauty of science is, you're always wrong and everything's always changing, and it's really exciting and fun. And I think that we've talked about this point too. I think that kind of how the landscape is changing is very important, and it might influence how we're considering this. But right now I feel on pretty solid ground, maybe because the stakeholders themselves are on the same ground. If you have anything or you want more about anything, please reach out to me, and thank you so much. This was such an honor. Awesome. Thank you.